I am super excited about today because I get to show you off what I learned yesterday about implementing the observer pattern into a Rust project, or at least creating the observer pattern. So let's go ahead and get ourselves set up here. The command for it. Oh, Control Shift 2. That's what it is. Okay, so CD documents code. Wait, I'm in documents. Will that work? No. Okay, so we have the GG Easy Infinite Runner in there, and I think I just did like a cargo new for that. So I'm gonna create a playgrounds right here. So we're gonna do a cargo new. Maybe before we do that, let's do a makedir. Playgrounds, CD into that. Oh, I realized that I have the music on in mine, but I kind of was thinking that we might be able to continue having that. So let's do the audio output capture. Bring that back. That way, if it's spamming the chat, at least you know, you can hear it too. Let me know if you don't like the music, and I will shut it off or find different music for next time. The reason why I'm getting that in the music in the chat per se is because I'm on the free plan for it, sort of doing a little bit of trial, but I can hear the music in my speakers. It's also going out through the stream, so it should be a little bit higher quality for you. I think I've got it on quite enough that my voice talking over it is perfectly fine, but that way if I have to concentrate or something, it's not like just silence everywhere. All right, so CD, what was this? Right, we've created a playgrounds. Now here I'm gonna do cargo new, and let's create a, this is essentially observer pattern Rust. And we'll open up code here. I'm gonna open up my notes just in case I need them. I stored them off in like 3 different places because I really didn't want to lose this. And I understand what's happening behind the scenes of like why this ends up working. But just in case I need to like go back over what I did. Gonna have that. Back to dashboard. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna do everything here. I guess not everything here in main.rs. Let's do it like very similar to what we have in the main library, so we can see how things are working. So I'm gonna create a live.rs, and in main, we are essentially just going to use. And it's observer pattern Rust. Let's create, so pub, like our main game state. So game state. We're not going to have anything in it, so we'll impl game state, function new. Even though I'm not really doing much here, I'm just sort of using, these are the standard constructor functions or patterns that we normally do. So I'm just going to do that. And we return a new game state, like so. So in main, we're going to take in game state, and we are going to run. We're going to create a new edition, new version of game state. So that game state equals game state new. And then over in library, we can have something like a run or start. So pub function run. This will take self. We'll probably have to make it mutable later. And it's not going to do anything right now. It's just going to be a function that we can run. So on main here, we can now say game state dot run. So that's the idea. Of course, in run, we could have a nice print line just to say, hello world. Starting. And we'll cargo run this. Oh, pub struct. There we go. Okay, so we get the starting. So this is the beginning of us going through this. Now, we know that for our observer pattern, we want basically the player that's going to be doing stuff. And then we're going to want the score, and that's going to be observing the player for when something happens. When something does happen, it wants to increment its own score. Let's go ahead and create score and player then. So I'm going to create a score.rs, and we're going to go ahead and mod it. Mod score. All right, so this is going to be pub struct score. It's going to be a tuple score, so it starts with a U64 because, of course, our players are going to get really high scores. We have to do that. We'll implement score. So pub function new score, and this will be score 0. So that's us. That's us creating a new score. Now, our score is going to have a couple different elements to it. We're going to want to be able to print the score. So pub function print score. That'll be something like drawing the score out to the screen. So we just need a reference to self. We're not going to return anything. We're just going to straight up print line score self.0. Okay, so that'll print the score, and then we need a function to increment it. So pub function increment. This will take a mutable reference to self. We're not going to return anything, and we're going to say self.0 plus equals to 1. And that's the basics of our score. I'm not going to add in any of the observer pattern stuff right now. We're just going to begin with the score in this state. And we know that we can, we know that we're going to be able to use this and increment score and do all the normal stuff to it, but we want to do this in the observer pattern. So let's go ahead and instantiate this new score here for, so use score. And we're going to want, I mean, we're definitely going to want to save this score off, aren't we? So we have a score, and this is going to be a type score here. When we instantiate and create new, we're definitely going to need to save this. Score. Let's first create a new one. So score equals score new. And there is a reason why I'm doing that. That will make it easier because we're going to do some stuff up here to score first when we implement the observer pattern. And okay, so when we run, we're going to print line starting, and now let's have the score print itself. So self.score.print the score. So if we run this, we've got starting and then score 0. Okay, perfect. That's kind of what we expected at this point. Let's create the layer. So this is going to be the player.rs, mod player. All right, pub struct player. Now, the player would have a bunch of things in here. It doesn't really matter for this example. We're not going to have to track the location or anything else. That's all superfluous and other things. We'll implement the player pub function new, and we're going to return a new player. So here's our new player. Now, other things that we need to be able to do to this player. Well, the player needs to be able to update itself, and I think that's the same. That's like the big thing here. So pub function update. This would normally take a mute self. I'm not really doing anything to that, and it doesn't necessarily return anything. But the big deal that's going to happen here is our player is going to jump over an obstacle. Need to send an event letting essentially the score know that I jumped over the obstacle. Now, of course, score might not be the only one that needs to know this. In our game, it is. But it's possible that we need to set, a grouping of them up, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But this is sort of like the basics. We're setting the scene for this. Use player. We're going to store our player, which is type player. And now we're going to create a new one. So let player equals player new, and store that in here too. So the idea is we now want in run to do self.player.update, and then we want that to update the score. So then we want to be able to call self.score.print score again, and have the score be two different things. So we want to be able to say starting, score, and then score. And we could maybe make this a little bit more explicit here by putting in a print line here too as well. So print line, I jumped over an obstacle. So that way we can see, okay, starting, we're starting the entire app. Our score is 0. We jumped over an obstacle. Our score is still 0. Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense. We haven't done anything yet in code to make that change. So what is the entire observer pattern about? It's about having something observing another thing. So in this case, we want the score to be observing the player. Whenever the player does something, it will notify all of its observers that it did something. So of course, we also need an event. The event is that we jumped over. We jumped over something. We can have like the event be an enum or something else. Let's start with like the most simple basic version that we could possibly get, which is the player in here. We need a list of observers. And so we know this is going to be a vector of some kind. But we found out last time that we can't just throw in, an instance or like a reference to something, because we'll have to play with lifetimes. And if we play with lifetimes in a game engine like GGEZ, those lifetimes are now going to go everywhere. And it's going to make everything a pain in the butt to deal with. And eventually we might not even be able to add more lifetimes because, well, why does the main like GGEZ update loop, why does it have to be aware of the lifetime for the player? Like the player should just be able to do its own thing. Because that means everything becomes extremely tightly integrated. So I do want this this vector here, because I do want a list of them. But I let's see, where is I need to wrap this vector, or inside the vector. I can't just have like, well, score. And we're gonna bring it in. So use super score. Well, I can't really do this. I certainly can't do this. There is a way. I did a little bit of research, found some blog posts, found a whole bunch of places that were attempting to implement observer pattern. And we're going to use a data structure that Rust provides that allows us to have multiple mutable references or multiple mutable sources at the same time. But we also need to extract it out and pass essentially score by like just a pointer to a place in memory. So we're going to use, what is it? It is under standard sync. We need arc and we need a mutex. So these together, arc and mutex, are going to allow us to basically do what we want to do here. So struct player. I'm gonna change the music to be more of a, let's see, it's under happy track. Let's put it under maybe chill. All right. Okay. So instead of just plain old score here, we're gonna have a vector of now arcs. And inside the arcs, we're gonna have a mutex. And inside the mutex, we're gonna have a score. That's what it's gonna be. I'm gonna turn on the Twitch highlighter. If you have any lines that you want me to go over and explain or is confusing, please use the highlighter. You could use a bang line and then the line number. Okay, that's a little bit interesting. Let's see if we can get this to compile. Well, obviously right now it's not going to compile because I put this in the wrong place. I want you up here. There. Now it's going to yell at us because we're not actually returning a player. So we need to take in a score, and this is going to be type arc mutex score. Just 2? Yeah. And this way we can say, okay, actually, you know what? I'm not going to add it here, right? I forgot. We're going to do observers and just have this be an empty vec. This is what we're going to start with. So we should be able to run this, and we should be able to get away with like no problems. Now we do have one error: unresolved import observer pattern. Oh, here, come on, restart the RLS. That makes it happier. So if we run this, cargo run, there should be no errors. Everything still works. Even though we're telling it, we're going to be storing this arc mutex score big thing. All right. So as part of like, we should probably create some traits for how this is going to work. So in our main library, I'll create, where do I want to put them? We could put them in our main library for right now, maybe. So we're gonna have pub trait. So we want we have the subject, what's being observed, and that's what we're creating with player. So let's create that first. So subject. The subject, we need two things. We need to be able to add an observer. So a function add observer. And we need a function. This is going to be notify. So add observer is the entire like, okay, we want to now register an observer. So in this case, the score. So that way we'll notify them later when an event happens. So add observer. And what are we going to take in? Well, we know we're going to need a mute self because we're going to have to add into that the vector. And we're also going to take in this case, we're going to be very explicit. We can maybe see if we can make this a little bit more generic later. So we're going to take in a score, which we know is an arc mutex of type score. All right. And then notify. We know this is a reference to self. Now, this will probably have to be a mutable reference to self later. Oh, and it's yelling at us that we don't have Arc&gt here. So use standard sync arc and mutex. And notify, all we're going to be doing is telling them we probably need to take in the event. And for right now, let's have this event be a, I think, what is it? I want it to be a stir, but I want it to be like a static stir. Expected type, found static. I always forget how to make the string static. Oh, is it like that? Yeah, okay. A static string. So that's our subject here. Now we're gonna want our score to have like a similar type of observer traits. So pub trait. I mean, this is kind of like the observer. It is the observer. So what does the observer have? Well, it registered itself with add observer. We're also going to want to be notified, and that's kind of the only thing. An observer can be notified. So function on notify or on event or anything like that. This is going to be a mutable self because it's going to mutate itself depending upon what event comes in. And then this is the event static string. And that's it. That's the these are the signatures of the methods that we need to add to make this observer pattern work. So let's make our score be added to the player. So we're gonna, now we need to use not just super score, but that other trait. So subject, and now we can implement So implement subject for player. And now player suddenly is a subject that can be observed. We know we're going to have a function. Does it? What's really nice is that it yells at us and tells us we need add observer and notify. So function add observer, self, and then we need to take in a score that is this Arc&gt score mess. We're not going to return anything. And then here we're going to say, this needs to be mutable. So self.observers.push the score. We're just going to straight up push that in. And that's our implementation of add observer. We're also going to have a function notify that is a self. And then we have an event that is going to be a static string. We're not going to return anything. Instead, we're going to loop through all of the observers and call that method on it, which doesn't exist yet, but it will. So we're going to do for observer in, and I need to clone the observer's vector for this. Now, so the vector could be huge, it could be small. In our case, it's going to be extremely small. There's only one item in it. Arcs are free for us to copy. They're pointers to a place in memory, so they take almost nothing up. The vector is pretty small too because arcs are pretty small as well and almost non-existent. So this shouldn't be too big of a deal for us. If it does become a pretty big deal, we might be able to get around it through some other methods. But to begin with, we're just going to do a clone here. And that way our iterator over will be nicer for us. So self.observers.clone. We've looped through that. Now we need to extract out of the arc and mutex so we can get the score itself. So that, and I might want to call this like a wrapped observer. And let's let observer equals, and so for this one, looking over my notes, the way that mutexes work is they allow multiple sources to have a mutable reference to something. That hence the name, mutex. But they'll prevent any one thing from having, they'll prevent any two instances of a mutable reference at the same time. This happens at runtime. So this is a little bit more expensive at runtime, but we get to have our cake and eat it too because of this. So we're going to take our wrapped observer and we're going to run the lock function on this. What does the lock function do? It tells the mutex, I want to check this out. Sort of like GitHub, right? I'm checking this out and I want to be able to mutate it. Don't allow anything else to have this in a mutatable at this time. So if this, mutex is made for threads. Like if I have 3 or 4 different threads and I want them all to be able to write to this one, to the score, let's say, I can't allow score to be written to like 4 times at the same time. So the locking halts the thread. Like it pauses the thread until nothing else is, checking out the mutex. So in a way, it's this could be slow. Now, I'm in a single thread. There is no way something else could have to it. So I know that we're not going to have a problem. The compiler doesn't, but locking won't actually pause us for very long at all, really, because there's only one thing going for mutable at this moment. So we're going to lock it. Once we lock it, we get the mutex out, and then we have to get it out of the arc. And that is an unwrap. And that gives us a reference, so you could see that it's this mutex guard now. We can destructure it, and then we can run the function on it. So we can destructure observer, and I can't remember, do I run the destructure there? Oh no, actually I don't need a destructure at all. That's someplace else. So now I can just do observer on notify, and we're gonna pass in our event. Now it's yelling at us because, hey, we can't find on notify inside of score. Well, that's okay. We are going to fix that. So in score, we're going to bring in that other trait. So use super. What was it? It was the observer trait. And we're going to implement that. So impl observer for score. We're going to have a function on notify, mutable self, and we'll take in our event that is a static stir. We're not going to return anything. And then on notify, okay, so what happens? Well, when we get this event, we do need to check to see if it's the right event. So if event is equal to, and we can just like handwrite this in because it's a static stir. If this is basically jumped over obstacle, then we want our self dot increment to run, and that's it. Okay, so no method named on notify found for this. I just implemented you. Are you going to be still upset about that, or what's our real error? Method not found on notify. Is it? On notify, I implemented that in. So on notify, the player is using, okay, let's make sure that it's the same. Yeah, okay, that is the same. It's passing in event, it's passing in the event. Public trait and inner library. Okay, so on notify. So all of that looks good to me. Now we haven't like added this in yet. Oh, do I need to save it? No. Okay, so method not found. Score. Oh, mutex card. Maybe I do need to destructure it. Okay, so in player, let's try destructuring this too. Well, that. Okay, so no method name on notify found for struct score in the current scope. And I think that's because I need to pull in the traits, don't I? So not just subject, I need to bring in the observer. Move occurs because type value has type score, which does not implement the copy trait. Oh, and do I need to borrow? Maybe I don't need that. Right, okay. So I forgot I need to bring the trait in to actually show that. Okay, now it's saying cannot borrow as mutable. Right, because on notify, inside of that, the score is mutating. So we do need this to be mutable here. And now I have no errors. So if I run this, it works. Now, of course, our score hasn't incremented yet, but that's because we haven't registered the score into player. But at this point in time, our code is compiling. Let's add it in and see if it works. So in our main library, we create the score, we create the player, and now we want to wrap up the score in an arc mutex and hand it to the player. Well, so we're going to need the player as mutable. And so we can say player dot add observer, and we're going to hand it this arc mutex score. So arc new mutex new, and then the thing that we're throwing in here, which is going to be a score. Now, if we do this, we lose, like, we're going to consume the score. So that doesn't seem to be a very good idea. So I don't actually want to do that. I want to do that here. Arc new mutex new. So we're going to create a wrapped score right here. And then we're going to clone this. Our wrapped score dot clone. Arc implements clone. Now score is a little bit interesting because it's a wrapped score. Well, so let's wrap. This should be a wrapped score now, so we know that this is actually an arc mutex score, like that. So your wrap score, and I don't need to clone because this is the original, so I don't need to clone twice. If I use it another time, I do need to clone it at that point. At this point in time, player is happy. What's unhappy here is attempting to use the score. Because it's now wrapped up in an arc and a mutex, we can't just straight up use it like this anymore. We're going to need to unwrap it to get at that. Well, so it's going to be a little bit interesting. Let's create a new block here. And I'm going to create a block for a little bit of memory management because I want things to be garbage collected or remove. I guess it's not really garbage collected is the wrong term. I want things to be scrubbed from memory as soon as I'm done with them so that I could do it again. So we're going to do let score equals, we're going to do our self.wrapped score. And we want, I don't think it's, is it lock? It is lock. We're just going to do the exact same thing that we did inside of player. So we're going to lock and unwrap. We're going to move in our, but instead of self.score, we're now going to say, okay, we want to print score, just like that. Now we have to copy that. We have to do this again for this other print score. And no errors. Let's see if this runs. Oh, it didn't run. I mean, it ran, but it didn't do the thing that we wanted to do. So let's see what we can we can find from this. The score is handed into the player. The player calls this. Let's make sure that on notify and self that increment. If this is, oh, you know what? We didn't pass in the right event. So the player, it now needs to like actually do its I jumped over an obstacle. So now it's going to self.notify and pass in this jumped over obstacle event. Like the actual doing the thing. Let's see if this works now. It did. Okay, so starting, our score is 0. The player jumps over an obstacle, and now the score is 1. At no time did the score have to be like told. It just registered itself with the player, and the player told a bunch of other things. Potentially, we could have multiple scores now. And this is the power of Arc and Mutex. Now, before, I had seen Arc and Mutex when we went through the book a long time ago. And I had just forgotten about it because I never used it. This, I think, is really, really cool for us because we found an actual reason to use it. Now, it's a little bit odd because we're using data structures that are intended for threading, thread safety in non-threaded program. This is a little bit interesting, but it works really well for us. Now, when I first wrote this last night, I was both ecstatic that I had been able to get it and also slightly horrified by like what this ends up looking like. This vec arc and mutex. And then we have to like do this entire unwrap and observer. We could probably do some error handling here where we can just do a question mark essentially to unwrap it for us. And then we have to do some like returns. But it because this will return an error if it can never actually obtain the lock. Like for example, if the mutex was deleted or destroyed. So like score is gone for some reason. Not a problem for us because we're not in threaded situations. We're not doing anything crazy like that. So what would happen? Let's actually, I want to save this off into Git in case any of you want to look at this code as it is before I then start experimenting. This is as far as I got with my experimentations last night. So this is game design patterns. We're going to stage all these changes and implementing observer pattern in REST. Push that up. And I believe if we do bang repo, yep, you can get all of that code is in the playgrounds directory inside of that repo that I have in chat right now. Let's go back to our code here. What if we don't always want it to be score? What if we want to store something else? Well, so we could do a generic, or we could just do an enum. So in library, and this is at the point where I'm no longer super familiar because I haven't done this part yet. So now we're on the, okay, let's explore, see what we can get. So if we have a pub enum, and these are gonna be the wrapped like the observers essentially. Yeah, and I think this writes. So observers. The other thing, you know what I realized? I may not need the enum. I wonder if I can do just a straight up generic function here, because in player we know that the score is implementing observer. So let's try this first. If I have a if I use the generic of observer. Now this generic doesn't exist, so I need to initialize it here. Like that. And then I need to give it a like where this is again. So where observer, come on. Observer has type, and this is observer. So now the implement player, we need to have this this type argument here. So this is observer. Cannot find it in the scope, so that's here. Let's just copy paste this. And I think we need to do the same. I can't remember if I need to do the same where at this point in time. I think I do. Wrong number of type arguments. So we create a new player. Yeah, so let's, there's observers. So if I do where observer is type observer. Now player, is it that? Maybe. It looks like that error went away. Okay, so then we have self.notify, no method name notify found or references player observer in a current scope. And that's where I was trying to say that observer is type observer because the observer has this on notify. Oh, the player is actually not, is a subject, is type subject. The size for values, dyn subject plus static cannot be known at compilation time. Ooh, okay, so this is a new problem. So if we want a vector here of these, it wants to know how big to make the vector. That's kind of why I was hoping to use a vector, because it could grow at runtime. The trait standard marker size is not implemented for dyn subject. Oh, plus static. That's because we have these static strings in here. I wonder if we make this. So let's go back to our trait. If we don't make this a static string, if we make our event just a full string, that way it's on the heap and it's growable. So it doesn't matter what the size is at compile time. So here in player, let's see, this will have to be a dot to owned to turn it into a string. Notify is upset because this needs to be a string. Let's see if that works for us. Now UR size is still unknown. Dyn subject plus static, and is that? There's one more. So subject and observer had to change for that. So in score, you're gonna take in a string, which means you need to be to owned to compare there. But let's say wrong argument, wrong number of type arguments found right here. So expected 1. When we create a new player, we need to give it the type. So unfortunately, this is starting us down a fun path, because player is taking in a vector that is a generic. And even though I'm trying to limit it to where this generic in here is an observer, and that's the only time I use this generic. But I guess the problem here is it still thinks it's a dyn subject plus static. Let me see if I can get better errors out of the real compiler. Okay, so for the first error, expected one of function on notify string. Oh, yes, I didn't give it what it really is. So on notify. Right, you're not just a string, you're the event. That's a string. So subject observer, string, okay. Let's try this again. Less errors here. Trait objects with an explicit dyn are deprecated. Okay, so Ivo and Karnaku, you'll catch the stream later. Awesome. Well, thanks for stopping by to say hello and have a great day. And I guess I'll see you in the future. So dyn subject. So this is in player.rs line 15. So in player line 15, we want this to be a dyn subject. What's next? Wrong number of type arguments expected, 1 found 0. So the player, when we create the player in the main library of 19, it doesn't know what type this is. So player, and I think I have to do this turbofish syntax where I say it's type it is the subject. Oh, and you're dyn. Okay. All right, we're down to 1 error. Wrong number of type arguments. So implement subject for player, expected 1 type argument. So in player, implement subject for player. And we want this. Oh, so here we also need this entire observer. Fun. I'm just going to copy you. So implement. Oh, you're checking on CJ? Awesome. Oh, is he streaming right now? He is streaming right now. Awesome. I didn't get the notifications, I guess, this morning. So you are saying cannot find it in scope, so we have to add it right here. Chantilly Cake, good morning. Implement subject. So the trait observer is not implemented for observer. Let's see, the trait observer is not implemented for observer. Blah, blah, blah. Do I need to do the where? Observer is type observer. No, it's not that. Oh, is this the thing that I've seen for some reason see in the future? Sounds funny. Well, I mean, I guess it kind of is, because I'm not going to be aware of it unless, like, you know, sometime around I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thought, Ivo. I'm glad you thought about that. I mean, hopefully he has a thought right then. Let's see. So subject, do I also have to add it in here? Wrong number of type arguments, expected 0, found 1. Okay, so it's not here. I do remember that there is this entire thing where I can do like a type. Set the type, and I can't remember where this is done. I've seen it done in some other like Rust programs, even in our ECS stuff. That might be a good place for us to look to see where to do it. So implement observer. Now this subject, the trait bound observer is not satisfied. Oh wait, it's not. This is the player. Do I have to do I want subject? Like, do I want a different generic for this? Do I even, maybe I don't want a generic at all? The trait bound subject observer is not sad. Wait, let me reset this. I may have misread the errors here. You're yelling at me saying the wrong number of type arguments, expected 1, found 0. For player, you're a type subject. The size for value, dyne cannot be known as compile time. Right, but we don't know if you're... Okay, we're back to a bunch of errors. Right, so it wants dyne subject here. The size for values of type dyne subject plus static cannot be known at compilation time. So for player rs, implement subject. For player, doesn't have a size known at compile time. I guess I wonder if this is where like boxing, like box it up would also be helpful. Boxes would force it to be on the heap, which therefore it doesn't matter what the size is at compile time. But arc shouldn't matter either, because it's just a pointer to where it is in memory. Trait bound observer is not satisfied. And required by the player. So I don't think that this is the right. I don't think this is the right path for me to go down. So I think I'm missing something. I think this is like my unfamiliarity with like working with generics. And I vaguely remember something about this in the book about like where you have to put certain things and like setting the types. If we open up Firefox Developer Edition, go back to GitHub. In my, let's see, where is it? Okay, learning specs. Let's go into our source, into our main library. I know there's a bunch of these that have like the type being set in them, and I wonder if that's what I need to do in that position. I think those are all on the systems. So there, we're using, right, okay, so type system data equals, and then whatever the type is, and then we see that that is what's coming in for this. I wonder if I need to create that here. And so instead of basically saying, okay, player subject that, I wonder if I need to do essentially type. What are you yelling about? You're yelling about. So pub struct player observer observer. I don't know if I need to do type observer or like the generic type observer equals I don't think I can just do that. You're going to be upset. Type observer is not a member of trait subject. Ooh. Can I do that? Type observer is not a member of trait subject. Oh, right. I don't want to like probably overwrite this. I don't think I want to do anything crazy like this. Now coming in, this is score, like Arc&gt score for these variable, like these variables coming in, like this score and this event string. So if I set a couple of these types, so if I do like the wrapper, like the wrapped score. And we know that this is going to be an arc mutex score. And now I can say the score, instead of just straight up is like that, you are a wrapped score. Cannot find wrapped score in a scope. You're right there. Type wrapped score is not a member of trait subject. Would that mean I need to add it to the trait? What are you? So subject. Right, so like I would potentially need wrapped score here. Because arc mutex score, it's not very happy with this. Unless, wait a second, this is looking for a specific score. In our player, we're now looking for this generic observer. So if we have a generic T, replace you with this T, where T is an observer. Does that make you less happy, less unhappy? So score, let's put you back. You're not a wrapped score. You are, so observers have score. So this is essentially our generic at this point in time. So score is an arc mutex, because we don't know what it is, right? It's T. Wrong number of type arguments. Okay, that made that error go away. Dyn subject, wrong. Let's go back and get the real. Save you first. Okay, so score, unused import score now. Right, because we're no longer needing this anymore. We're now using generics for this all. Okay, wrong number of type arguments, expected 1, found 0, line 22 of the main library for player of Dyn subject. So line 22, player of Dyn subject now. The subject takes in T, that's an observer. So do I need to do this where you're an observer? And you need to be Dyn. Okay, one error now. Expected 1 type argument, player line 15, so Dyn subject. So we have this Dyn subject. Subject itself now takes a type which is the observer. You need to be dine. And then, of course, we're back to the we don't know what the size is. We're back to 14 errors. So we keep on getting close, and then, man, we just go farther away. So the trait observer is not implemented for T. This is player RS, line 27. Do I have to implement for this where T is, I think, an observer? The size for values cannot be known at compilation time. Player dine subject and observer doesn't have a size known at compile time. Right, well, so back to like it not being on the heap when I want it to be on the heap. So that way I can just say, hey, ignore that. I don't care that you don't know what it is at compile time. And the other errors are pretty. Observer is not satisfied. Not normally known at compile time. Observer is not satisfied. So similar ending things for that. So we got really close. I'm thinking that maybe this isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. Let me create. So I have a bunch of this code that is sort of moving off. We had it working. I'm going to create a branch off of here called attempting generics. And I put these in. So attempted to use generics, lots of errors. If we switch back to the master branch, we're back. Everything is working again. If instead of using a generics, I use an enum. So public enum observers. Is that what I would want to do? So public enum observers. This will then, so we have like for example the score, and I want the score to be, I guess, like a tuple. That is this specific, like the wrapped score, I think. I may have to do a little bit of research, like continue playing around with this on my own for like how to get this to be a single type that wraps around. So we have our observers. If we have the score, that's like maybe this score right here. I might want it to be this Arc&gt score thing. Because then I could put a clone into that. That way, if I have another one, so let's say something else, I don't know, what else could potentially care about observing something? Maybe the game state wants to know for like updating purposes. So if I have like game state, and that would be an arc mutex game state. So there's no errors in just having this enum exist for us. But if I was to try to use it, so instead of in our new, So here's where we're wrapping a score and cloning it. I would potentially want to create this enum observers and pass it in. Gareth Hubble, good morning, hello. So let my observers equals observers, and you are the score. And inside of this, we're gonna store the wrapped score dot clone. And then in observer, so player add observers, we're gonna just throw in this observers. I'm gonna guess in a way it's an observer. GLHF, good luck, have fun. So we're going to pass an observer here. So our player add observer. So we need to change the trait here now. So this isn't a score anymore. This is now an observer, which is this enum observers. Observers. And so if I do that, now you're yelling at me that when we implement this, it's not compatible. It's promote people be nice when streaming and watching streams. Click the icon. Oh, is there an icon for you? I don't see that on my side. Okay, so now we need this. So super observers. Not the best name. I think it would be observer would be better. So observers. And then we're gonna go down down this. Oh, the badge left your name. Oh, that's so. I see. That's cool. Observers. So self push score. So we're gonna and we want to name this observer and push the observer. Well, now this observers is no longer a vector of Arc&gt scores. This is now a vector of observers. All right, so that works. Now, when we notify, we get our event. We wrapped observer in self.observers. Okay, that's fine. We're gonna clone the vector. Observers doesn't implement clone. Okay, so that's fine. We can implement clone off of here. So this is derive clone copy. Do we not need to? Just clone. Just clone. Okay, so in player, we're able to clone it. But now, of course, the wrapped observer is an enum now. So now we want to match this. So we want to match the wrapped observer. If the wrapped observer is observers score, and then we're going to get the wrapped score out of here. Then we want to take this entire thing and do that. So we're going to go there. Wrapped score dot lock. Let's multi-line this. So then essentially we're gonna do U2. So that mute observer equals wrapped score. Lock, unwrap it, match on you, not, oh right, and then do you, and then I'm just gonna say, you know what, I don't really care. What is it, unimplemented? Yeah. We didn't implement you. So no errors. And it still works. And we're able to pass in multiple events now and store multiple events. So enum seems to be the way to go. It like made it look a little bit worse. We don't need to like bring in arc and mutex, so player doesn't need to be aware of this, you know, bringing these in anymore. It doesn't need to be aware of the score specifically. It just works. So not super nice. And it kind of makes me wonder if I can implement this as a default implementation, because I'm just taking in the static string and I'm just going over those. But this is a way to do it. And so next time we might be playing with implementing this into our game, and we'll see how that ends up going. But anyways, I need to get off and head off to work. I saw that CJ was streaming, so I think I'm going to set up a quick raid for him. Coney Garden, we'll start the raid for that. I didn't actually see what he's doing, but I have worked with CJ in the past, and whenever he's streaming, like, yeah, we can definitely do the raid. Anyways, I hope that you all enjoyed watching this. I've learned a lot by doing this last night and sort of continuing on with this morning. I hope this has been useful to you, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your Friday, and I'll see you next time, whenever that is. Switch over to OBS for the ending screen.